Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra nuggets and tidbits to get teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where should we go to first? Well, I did promise to play you the entirety of this address that a Ukrainian made to the Council, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, to Viktor Orban, basically, or to the Hungarian group there, representing the Hungarian parliament and Viktor Orban. I don't know if he was actually there, but this is a rousing speech and you just have to listen to it all. It's fantastic. So over to Oleksly Goncharenko.
I wanted to speak about other things, but I heard our Hungarian colleague and I can't not to respond to it. Because when you're saying that you live in a war zone on Hungarian-Serbian border, welcome to Ukraine. I will show you war zone. I will show you real war zone. You should see it. The only prime minister in Europe which has not visited Ukraine is Prime Minister Orban. Take your prime minister and visit our country. I will show you the war zone. And I will show you why people sometimes in their life need to run away from a butchers who came to kill them. I will show you Bucha, Gostomel, Irpin. I will show you how it is to live like this. I will show my native Odessa, where just a week ago explosion was just 200 meters from my home. And my children were scared and crying on my hands. I will show you what is a war zone. And when you are saying that your enemies are migrants or refugees running from tyrants and butchers like Assad or Putin or others, no. Your enemies and our enemies are Putin himself, Assad himself, other people who made other human beings to run away, to leave their homes, that who are our enemies. And you should know this, because if you don't know this, are you really Europe? You said it is a border of European Union, but European Union is not just a word. It's not just a stars on the flag. It's the values. It's humanity. And I want to say dziękuję bardzo to Polish people who accepted Ukrainian refugees. Mulțumesc to Romanian, Moldovans. Dziękuję to Czech people. I want to say Dankeschön to German. Thank you to English people. Aita to Estonian. Paldies to Latvian. Ačiū to Lithuanian. To everybody who saved the lives. And by this, who showed that they are human. And that is so important. The most important task in our life is to be human. But it is the most difficult, but the most important task. So please be human. I want to address all of you. Please support those who are running from the war, Ukrainians or other people who just need this support and shelter. I understand that sometimes you can be used to what's going on in the world. Sometimes you can be tired from all of this. But believe me, there are places in the world which are much, much worse than Serbian-Hungarian border, as you told us. And when you are in such place, the only thing you need is another human who is standing shoulder to shoulder with you. Thank you very much.
Well, drop mic there. That is wonderful rendition of the situation, really, of how he's feeling, what it means to be, I guess, a Ukrainian, and also, you know, speaking to the Hungarian position of essentially supporting Putin and, by extension, Assad and other political ne'er-do-wells. Just, yeah, really good, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And Hungary, goodness me, what a melting pot of sort of differing tensions. On the one hand, they're in the EU, in NATO, and on the other hand, acting in ways that are benefiting benefiting Putin's dictatorship, which is diametrically opposed to the EU and the values thereof, and NATO, obviously. So yeah, Hungary is a really problematic political entity. It'd be really interesting if there are any Hungarian viewers to this? Well, what are your observations of what's going on inside Hungary, of how the war is being interpreted on the shop floor, I guess, and also how the narrative is being um, presented to the Hungarian people? Is there a freedom of press? Is there a state narrative that all the other press organizations have to adhere to? Yeah, let me know if you can help with that. Okay. Speaking of help, actually, I have a viewer an awesome viewer who is in the software industry. He's getting, a Ukrainian is doing some work for him, and he's trying to pay this Ukrainian. Ukrainian is saying, "I don't want payment directly. Please, can you pay essentially the Ukrainian army?" And there's a bank account. You can see it on lots of places, government websites, as they're raising money. So he's given all the details. There's a kosher bank account and everything, Bank of Ukraine. And my viewer was saying, "Look, I really want to pay this guy, but I also don't want to be hit with a $50 fee for paying internationally to this bank in Ukraine and just lining the bankers' pockets. Is there any way?" So I'd just be interested to know if anyone else knows of the best way of paying internationally. I know things like PayPal and stuff like that are really good ways, but if you're trying to pay into a set bank account rather than a PayPal account, or whether the Ukrainian army has other accounts like a PayPal account or anything like that. If you have any information on that, let me know so that this guy can try and pay for the services of a Ukrainian who's not wanting the money themselves, but wants it to go to the Ukrainian war effort. Okay, speaking of the war effort, here's Mick Ryan, retired Australian general. It has been nearly 3 weeks since the initial ground combat phase of the Ukrainian 2023 offences since they have commenced. What is the state of the campaign? Well, in an interview with the BBC this week, President Zelensky described how progress in the Ukrainian 2023 offensives has been, quote, slower than desired. He then described how, quote, some people believe this is a Hollywood movie and expect results now. It's not. This statement is an acknowledgement that military campaigns are often difficult to plan and assemble and are infinitely more complex to execute over time and space. The Ukrainians are fighting through a deep defensive regime constructed by the Russians. More on that later. Any slowness of these offensives is partially due to the slow commitment and arrival of foreign military aid at the end of 2022. It's unlikely that this offensive could have begun sooner due to the individual and collective training requirements for Western equipment. I talked to you about how there have been delays with the delivery of equipment, not only with the pledging and delivery of the equipment, but then the equipment often has to be brought up to spec. So there's a lot of equipment that is in very poor state, hasn't been used for a long time, being given, kindly by Western nations and entities. But then as it gets to Poland, it needs to be fixed up. And so you might have a schedule for receiving this equipment, but then it takes another month or so to actually get it in working order. Then you need to factor in training on this equipment, so on and so forth. So there's still whole brigades, I think, being trained at the moment. There's still lots of equipment being trained on, and that is a continual process. So that you can plan to have a counteroffensive at a particular time, but there are lots of moving cogs in that plan, and this will affect the timing and can affect how quickly these things can come to pass, as there are still units being trained. You can't expect them to be thrown onto the front line now, and so this could represent delays. The demands of halting the 2023 Russian offensive, he continues, Russian offensive year will have complicated the timing of this offensive. The Ukrainians still needed to defend large swathes of their land against Russian thrusts on several axes. They did so successfully, but it consumed time and resources. Now the Ukrainians are in the initial phases of their offensive, but what does that mean from the Russian and Ukrainian perspectives? It's worth examining Soviet and Russian military doctrine to understand how these defenses are laid out. Every army has some form of doctrine that provides guidance on how to design, construct, and execute a defensive scheme or maneuver. Defensive schemes have a security zone which extends for tens of kilometers in depth. This will have a low density of defending troops, which have missions to collect information on advancing troops, impose attrition on them, and force delay upon them. During this time, lower range fires will probably also be used against high value targets of an advancing enemy, including engineer breaching assets, headquarters, and artillery. Well behind this security zone will be the main defensive position or positions. These will generally consist of at least two echelons, depending on how likely it is that an enemy will use this axis of advance. Deployed behind these main defensive positions are the various artillery units, which will have been pre-registered on key anticipated enemy routes and assembly areas. Behind the main defensive positions will be the different reserve forces that senior commanders have formed. These doctrinal prescriptions of defensive layouts have emerged over decades. They are the product of hard-learned lessons of historical combat. They provide standardized approaches for developing a defense and understanding the resource requirements of them. These doctrinal approaches by the Soviets, Russians, and other armies permit less experienced troops to be used in defensive schemes of maneuver. As such, having these doctrinal layouts helps the Russians give their large numbers of newly mobilized troops. It helps the Russians given their large numbers of newly mobilized troops. Finally, these defenses are not evenly constructed across the entire front. In some areas, terrain prevents such approaches, but they are most dense where the Russians will have done an appreciation of Ukraine's most likely objectives for their offensive. And this is where we can go and look at the war map and see indeed that that is the case. When we look at the defensive lines, they are not randomly set out across the front. Here we have, in fact, there's probably a better map to use than this one. If we look to, here we are. Here we have certain objectives, Ukrainian objectives like Tokmak, like Bilmak, being surrounded by defenses, by fortifications, and on the route to there, you have the densest sets of fortifications around Polihi as well. These fortifications also follow particular main supply routes, in this case on the way to Melitopol, and as you can see just below Vasilivka as well. So the Russians have thought about this. They've had a long time to sort these defenses out and are still indeed building them as we speak, as the counteroffensive is taking place. Okay, so he continues. The interesting thing in the coming weeks will be if the Russian appreciation of Ukraine's most likely and most dangerous to Russia courses of action match the actual Ukrainian campaign plan. The Ukrainian design for their offensive campaign in 2023 appears to have embraced a broad front approach. There are a few reasons why this is the most logical strategy for them to adopt. It generates uncertainty in the minds of the Russian commanders. They don't really know where the main weight of effort for the Ukrainian ground offensive will fall. It permits better operational security for the Ukrainians. It also enables a wide variety of deception operations. So in other words, if you attack in a number of places across a really long front, then the Russians can't really pinpoint where your main attack is going to come. And it also allows you to commit to more deception operations as well. I wonder about what's going on outside of the Zaporizhzhia front. So really, there's a lot of activities stretching the entire line along here, going into Donetsk, southern Donetsk, and across and past Vuhledar to Novomikhailivka. But there's the activity taking place on the eastern front appears to be mainly where activity has previously taken place. So is that part of the counteroffensive? Does that count? Could they strike anywhere else? One of the most, I don't know, possibly revealing or maybe just plain interesting points of news today from the frontline attacks or from the activity on the front line is that the Ukrainians are attacking between Mariinka and Krasnohorivka, which is just south of Donetsk city. And they've attacked there in a place where they haven't really attacked before. And I'm talking all the way back to 2014. It's been a stalemate since 2014 there. They've made some advances now, and the first time in 9 years. Why there? What is going on? Is that a deception? Or is that a potential place for them to attack? But then if there's just that one place along that whole front line that's a bit different, then that doesn't give us much scope for them to deceive the Russians and keep them on their toes. You'd have to attack in a number of places, unless they're including all the usual places like Avdiivka, Donetsk, Bilorivka, and then up to Crimea, so on and so forth. So if they're just attacking in all those places as well, then that could be, this attack near Donetsk city could be just part of that whole front, just adding another location. But yeah, just trying to work out what Ukraine are intending with that attack in particular. Okay, to continue. Operating across a broad front allows more capacity to respond to opportunities that emerge. If a force is overly concentrated, not only is it more vulnerable to attack on the modern battlefield, it is less able to adapt and exploit enemy mistakes across the entire front line. Concentrating a large proportion of Ukraine's ground forces in one area, notwithstanding excellent contributions of regionally focused territorial defense forces, might expose Ukraine to Russian tactical and operational thrusts to take more territory. Gerasimov responds. It's a very short sentence. In a recent article reviewing the options available to General Gerasimov to respond to Ukraine's 2023 offensive, I described one of his options as follows. Quote, Gerasimov's next variation is option 1, but with limited offensive jabs at Ukrainian weak spots if they open up. This is a more complex option because he would need to assemble the combat and support forces for an offensive operation from his already weakened force. It appears that the Russians, rather than sitting back passively across the entire front line, have chosen this option. The Russians have conducted attacks on the Donetsk, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, and Seversky Donetsk axes. And I would actually include on the Zaporizhia axis as well, where they are counter-attacking in places like Pyatikhatki. So they're using this attack as a form of defense option. But I don't know how wise that is, because they are treating their own forces, their own future capability. If they're going to lose huge amounts of mechanized equipment in doing that, then what position does that place them in the event of a large-scale counter attack by the Ukrainians? I'm just not too sure about that. These Russian attacks also might mean that Gerasimov is concerned about the Ukrainians developing momentum on the southern front and seizing enough territory to place Crimea at risk. He will be desperate to draw more Ukrainian forces to the eastern for a war of attrition. How long the Russians can sustain these attacks in the east is questionable. And as I say, not just in the east. Given the Ukrainian preparations for their current offensives, it is likely that the Russian attacks in the east will culminate before the Ukrainian offensive of 2023 does. Yes, I was talking about exactly this with the Crimea area of the front line in today's mapping update. So the question is, and ISW was talking about this, the idea is, if they are attacking in this Crimea area, how long can they hold that momentum up for before they culminate, if they are not being supplied with consistent reserves to rotate their troops or to help consolidate areas? So the ISW is talking about how the attacking forces were taking some ground, but they didn't have the reserves in order to consolidate the ground they had taken. So the attacking forces have to do the consolidation, which means that they can't continue their momentum and gain the initiative in the area for any sustainable period. They're having to do all their work themselves. So yeah, I kind of is it's very connected to what Mick Ryan was saying in his thread. Let me know what you think about all these ideas in the thread below. Chris Owicki, one of his threads, I talked about this for a short while in my news piece this morning. The Wagner Group is setting up its own military police force to enforce discipline in the occupied regions of Ukraine, even against Russian army troops who it says are boozing like pigs. It's currently seeking recruits among former law enforcement employees. Wagner is recruiting former members of Russia's police and National Guard special forces, the SOBR, OMON, GROM, and other units to serve in its new police force. An advertisement asking for volunteers has been posted to its VK social media page. The advert, quote, invites former employees who have experience in operational work and detention to carry out, quote, detention, operational, and commandment functions. The work will be interesting. You can be rest assured of that. Goodness me. It's like, come and fight in a war where you've got a high percentage chance of dying. The work will be interesting. Yeah, great. A monthly salary of 240,000 rubles, $2,961 is offered. I mean, that's pretty decent. Plus bonuses for 6-month contracts serving in the Special Military Operations Zone. Employees are also eligible for state awards. The Russian news outlet Vestka called the number provided and spoke to a recruiter called Dennis about what the work entails. Quote, "We are recruiting a commandant regiment out of operatives. We will call it military police," he said. Continuing, "You'll have to make sure everyone follows Wagner's company rules, make sure there are no thieves and looters, no beatings, drunkenness, and so on. Also, your duties include the operational task of detecting Ukrainian DRGs, those are deep reconnaissance groups, reconnaissance and sabotage groups, and working naturally with Russian DRGs, interrogations, operational investigation, all operational work as it is," Dennis said. The new unit is to be tasked with ensuring the Russian army volunteers and soldiers don't violate Wagner's own rules of conduct. Quote, "It is not a simple thing to catch the Ministry of Defense. The bastards are breeding there, boozing like pigs. We have full authority." End quote. The recruits will be sent to wherever Wagner deems there's a need. Quote, "You're not in a prisoner camp. Wherever they send you, that's where you'll work," Dennis says. "You work bravely. There will be no questions at all." Are you really joking? Dennis says interest in the new force has been strong. Quote, "The vacancies are open at the moment. How relevant they will be in a month, I won't tell you. Russia is big. We get calls from all over the country. You wouldn't believe it." And that's the end of that. So, yeah, they are trying to entice people in these brave souls into the military police. But goodness me, I mean, they're struggling to get mobilized soldiers signed up. I don't know that this will be any more successful. And what does it say if Wagner are it appears unilaterally deciding that the Russian forces need a police force within annexed zones? Is that a bit of an insult? Yeah, is that if you're imagine running the country now, like any country, so Britain, and then someone just starts setting up a police force, saying, "Oh, we're setting up a police force here." It's a bit presumptuous. What's wrong with the one that's already there? What are you? I mean, it's bit of an insult. So you wonder whether this has the blessing of Putin, or whether this is just, as I say, unilateral decision. And if it is, oh my goodness me, how Prigozhin hasn't fallen out of a window yet, I don't know. But as I've discussed before, the reason he hasn't is because he is offering a utility to Putin, if not for, the Russian MOD hate him, right? But Putin evidently doesn't. He does enough for Putin, does enough useful stuff for Putin to keep him on board and allow for the big tension and arguments that exist between Wagner, between Prigozhin and Gerasimov, and the Russian MOD, so on and so forth. So, would this provide a utility for Putin? I don't know. I don't know how far Prigozhin can stretch his relationship with Putin. And we'll go on to, actually, now's a good time to speak of Prigozhin's speech that he came up with this morning. So I'll read out these subtitles. I know that might annoy some people, but a lot of people do listen to this and don't watch it. So therefore, if I just play these videos with the Russian vocals, but the English subtitles, those listening won't be able to know what's going on. So that's why I read them. Sorry, not sorry. Anyway, what does Prigozhin say? Two realities. On the ground now, as of today, Russian army is retreating in the Kherson and Zaporizhia directions. The AFU are pushing the Russian army. We're washing with blood. No one is giving the reserves. There is no control. Same hysteria. Where the general staff head after a glass of vodka screams like a woman, like a pig, demanding to return to the positions over the phone. A bit of butchered English there, but you get the idea. He's not being nice to the Russian command, I believe. What can the commander do? They can say it's all returned and draw a red line on the map that is a few kilometers to the north than in reality. Thus, what is being told to us is a complete lie, and we will only face the facts when, like it was in Liman, in Kherson, in many such places, he says, many other places where a bunch of these scumbags, realizing that they lost a huge chunk of land, will get together and state that they regrouped to more valuable positions. Right, this is talking to Viranyo. So Viranyo, go and watch a Perun video on this, on Russian lies up the military hierarchy. But this is, so the example would be, I'm a Russian commander, you're a Russian general, right? So I'm reporting to you. I'm giving you a report on how far we've advanced, or whether I spent the money, how I spent the money on training, or where all the new tanks are that you've given me the money to buy, or whatever it is. I give you this report, and I know it's BS, right? And I give that report to you. You take the report and you know it's BS. But you know that I know it's BS. And I know that you know it's BS. I give you that report and you take it on. But I know that you know that I know it's BS. And I know that you know that I know that you know it's BS. And then likewise for yourself, you know that I know that I know that you know, and we just go through this merry dance. So like, I'm giving you something that's obviously BS. We like, if we talked about it openly, it'd be like, here's a report, it's a load of crap. And you go, thank you for that report. I know it's a load of crap. I'm going to sign it off anyway. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we go our separate ways. And then you take that report and you give it to your superiors, and the same thing takes place. And that's how BS goes up the levels to the very top. And this is what Prigozhin is basically admitting here. So the Russian commanders are saying, yeah, we've made these gains, and then that goes on and up. But at some point, that BS gets accepted as truth. So while there's this acceptance that we all know there's a load of rubbish, at some point, particularly, I think more so with the lines on a map than with whether you've done the training or whether you spent that money on fuel or tanks or whatever, there is at some point it's like, okay, that is actually what's happened. And when you get up to someone like Putin, they get this information in which they then take as truth. But actually, it's just BS that's come up the ladder. And garbage in, garbage out. Putin then makes decisions that are completely nonsensical to people that know the reality, but might make some kind of sense if you live in this, if all that were to be true. And the problem with Putin, as I keep saying, is he can't verify this stuff because he doesn't use the internet, doesn't have a smartphone. Internet's CIA's tool, whatever. So he can't verify any of this stuff. So he has to go to the people who are giving him that stuff to try and verify it. And it kind of reinforces that information bubble he is existing in. And what happens then is that at some point reality comes colliding in to these people's worlds, and they have to do a reset. And that looks like when the MOD announce we are regrouping to more valuable positions, which is either we're retreating, we're outright retreating, that's one way of spinning it, or it turns out we weren't here, we thought we were here, and turns out we're back here, so let's say we've regrouped to more valuable positions. And eventually the BS, the web of lies just falls apart. Now, Prigozhin here is understanding this really well, and he is communicating this perfectly reasonably. The question is, does what he says get back to people like Putin? How far up the line does this go? Does Putin ever hear about the things that Prigozhin says? Or is he being curated, having his information curated by others in the MOD who hate Prigozhin? So they're not going to be the people that are going to be presenting this stuff to Putin. So maybe Putin never hears about the stuff Prigozhin says. And we think, why has Prigozhin not ended up falling out of a window? It might be because Putin doesn't know about this. And he still has a utility for Prigozhin and still wants him alive and says, no, I want him alive. And everyone else knows, well, do you know what he said about you? And of course he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. I'm kind of speculating here. But certainly there must be utility in Prigozhin because he is not dead yet, and he's still able to make these videos and say these things. Yeah, quite incredible. But what Russian voices have to do, and those kind of people on my threads, are Clive Engel, who repeats TASS and the MOD stuff, and every day posts these strings of what the MOD says. It's like, yeah, it's BS. The reason I don't pay attention to anything you say is because it's BS, right? And here's Prigozhin saying it's BS. Now, either Prigozhin is wrong or the MOD is wrong. You can't have it both ways. So you make your choice. And if Prigozhin is wrong and he's the one that's on the front line doing most of the stuff and not your Gerasimovs, then on what justification do you have that Prigozhin is wrong and the MOD are correct? Okay, so he continues a little bit later. The same is happening in Bakhmut. The enemy is infiltrating our defense deeper and deeper. The enemy is not killing its soldiers. He is preserving equipment. The only thing he's not preserving is ammo. Our soldiers are dying, are leaving with wounds. Any wounded soldier will not take the gun tomorrow. The time is collapsing quickly, he says. I mean, that is pretty ominous. I don't know if this was the first or the last video there, but if we go on to the next one, I'll just do this and then I'll leave the other two for a video tomorrow. Too much Prigozhin will, I'm sure, do you nothing. So he continues, on 19th of March, I for the first time came to Ukraine. I asked the local commanders, why aren't we providing the numbers of our dead and wounded soldiers? I was told that at the top, this is of no interest to anyone. There's an objective that needs doing and we will be counting the dead after the war. Again, this goes back to the MOD figures. The General Staff of Ukraine produced these because they are actually useful for them, not just for people on the internet going, I wonder how many people died in the war. It's like they need to know for their strategic planning. Like if they don't know their loss numbers, then how can they plan how many people they need to recruit, train, what units will need to be operational where? I mean, if they have had catastrophic losses in that unit, then we need to rotate them out. And so it's all part of the planning. Where the Russians, Prigozhin saying the Russians were like, yeah, no, it doesn't matter how many people die. We'll count them after this thing's over. Yeah, this thing's still going on a year and a bit later. Are you counting them yet? Do you have an idea of what's going on? Because Jonathan Pierce, would say that you need to do a general mobilization pretty much now. In fact, pretty much 6 months ago. You haven't done it. I mean, if you really want to win this war by conventional means, then you're going to need a lot more people to do it. Have you not done that because you don't really know, you've not got a very good grasp of how many people you lost? Then it goes back to this Vranyo thing where you've got Russian commanders possibly not saying the true loss numbers that they are suffering to the people above them for fear of being punished for failure. We've lost 600 people. Oh no, can't say that. So we've lost 150 people, and then that BS then gets multiplied as all these commanders are doing that, and then the Russian echelons of the top echelons of the military hierarchy have garbage information, garbage in, garbage out, make poor decisions. Yeah, we're not going to mobilize. We don't need to yet. Yeah, you pretty much do, if you're going to continue this nonsensical approach to war. Anyway, to continue with Prigozhin. No one cared what efforts it would take to achieve victory, and at the time when we arrived, it was already impossible to talk about victory. These were micro advances. In order to achieve control over Ukraine, it was needed to either take Donbass or reach the left bank of the Dnieper River, or capture it all without Lviv or Western Ukraine, or with it. That's a different story. Or to simply replace the leadership. We were unable to replace the leadership. It had already become clear we won't take Donbass with these forces. I mean, goodness me, I keep talking about this article. I wrote back in April last year, 2022, that they couldn't win. They realized that within a week, or they should have realized that within a week. And they kind of did. Because they kind of changed. They didn't have a plan B. They went in with a plan A. We're going to depose the government by marching into Kiev. They couldn't get to Kiev. Oh dear. So we can't depose the government. No. Right. And we've got all these soldiers and Rosgvardia in Ukraine. Yeah. What are we going to do with them? I don't know. Should we take Donbass? Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. Okay. Can we do that? No. We failed. Should we take Seversk area? Yeah, that sounds a good idea. Okay. Have we done that? No. Should we take Bakhmut? Yeah, Bakhmut. Good idea. Yeah, we'd love it. That'd be amazing. We can take Bakhmut. That'd be such a PR win. 11 months later. We got Bakhmut? Not really. But yeah. Just Prigozhin realizes this, but the Russian leadership don't appear to realize this. So he knows what's going on. And again, it goes back to these Russian voices. Who do you want to listen to? Someone that seems to know what he's talking about, even though he's a horrible individual? Or are you going to listen to the Russian MOD, Gerasimov, and Shoigu and Putin, who clearly don't have a Scooby-Doo what's going on? There you go. Anyway, Prigozhin continues. Every day we needed to show advances of 50, 100, 200 meters. There was no management. There were hysterias. A mess in armament, a mess everywhere, total chaos. If it wasn't for the chaos, instead of 10 people, one would die. But 10 are dying instead of one. So he's saying we're taking 10 to 1 deaths to what we should do if this was being done properly. Someone must be responsible for these lives. They never came back. A part was buried. A huge part is missing in action. Everyday relatives of various soldiers with no relation to Wagner send questions to me. The guys who went to the MOD, that number of MIA missing in action that we see is impossible. They were thrown away like meat as there was no way to reclaim them, and still this is hidden. So the numbers still aren't, talked about. I mean, absolutely fascinating. He's got an idea of what's going on. He's on the shop floor. He's working. He's been to the front lines. He's talked to his commanders. Has Gerasimov done that? No. Has Putin done that? No. And when they do that, do you think the people they're talking to tell them the truth? We've seen videos where Wagner commanders have absolutely slated the MOD to Prigozhin. Prigozhin's been there and they've been we're not getting the shells, we're not getting this. They are perfectly honest with him because they can be, because actually they can blame the MOD, right? And so he knows what's going on. But do those commanders do that to Shoigu, to Gerasimov, and to their commanders? No, they don't. So you got a situation where Prigozhin knows reality, and the equivalents in the Russian MOD hierarchy don't. Garbage in, garbage out. So what I'll do is go through the other two videos to that series of what he says tomorrow in the extra, because too much of Prigozhin do anyone in. But yeah, there is more to add to that. Okay, here's a nice little infographic from the BBC just showing difference between the Kakhovka reservoir, or the Zaporizhia reservoir, before the dam was blown up, and then after. So you can see how catastrophic that the destruction of the dam was, and the implications that might have in this case on the ecosystem. That's what you see from that image, but then also the fact that all this water ain't going to be going to the agricultural lands and will have flowed out into the Black Sea, along with an awful lot of pollution. Trentelenko says, and this is concerning the Chonhar Bridge that was blown up, or possibly the 3 Chonhar bridges that were blown up, rail bridge and 2 road bridges. The AFU is about to turn Chaplynka into a Gimler's abattoir of Russian logistics traffic. This is given that, and I've talked a little bit about this already, but let's have a little look and see. So I don't know if this is the best map. Actually, we'll go back to the larger map. So you have the Chonhar. You can see the Saivash there, which is this area of very shallow water that's anywhere between sort of 1 and 3 meters, I think, depending on the tides. The bridges that were blown up were here, and I think a railway bridge there, and that took 70% of the military traffic, as far as I understand. Or I don't know if that's 70% of all traffic from Crimea to the mainland, or from the mainland to Crimea, which has meant that now that has to go through Armyansk and through the Perekop Isthmus. And you can see there's a railway line there that will be, one assumes, will be used, and a road, but particularly the roads, I think, because I don't know that rail line then joins up to any other. I don't know if there are smaller lines feeding off that at all. Probably not. So that railway line could be really important, taking it out there. I haven't seen any footage of that. I've just heard claims that the railway bridge was destroyed as well. So if we go and look at my map, let's take that down to Crimea, and we will see here the bridges that were hit were the two that you can see there. The Storm Shadow missile took them out, or missiles took them out. I don't know how quickly reparable they'll be, but it's not great for the Russians, obviously. And then the train comes up here and crosses there, and apparently that was hit as well. But I don't have definite confirmation of that, but that is a claim. So that means that everything now has to go through here, through Armyansk, and that means that now it's going to be arguably like, well, just a very simple destruction of the logistics lines there, you would think. There's talk about Chaplynka being certainly the road logistical connection between Crimea and Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts. Chaplynka was a place where there was an airbase. There's Chornobyivka, which was near Kherson. Yeah, Chornobyivka there. So this is that was an airbase that was hit, and then there was a meme that I shared with you, a joke of a revolving airbase that basically it got hit, blown up, and then they put loads of new equipment there, and then you just get blown up again, and then you get so the Russians, it was a graveyard of helicopters and all sorts of equipment for quite a long time, and then eventually, this was after HIMARS particularly came on the scene, and then eventually they moved everything back to Chaplynka, but then Chaplynka was hit, so I think they moved everything back to Jankoy as an airbase there and further back. So Chaplynka can be hit by HIMARS. So let's go and look at the distance from Chaplynka to the Ukrainian front line. Well, there you go. So that's easily in HIMARS range. That's sort of in the 60s of kilometers from where you'd be safely putting a HIMARS. So you'd actually much more safely put them further back and still hit Chaplynka. So Chaplynka can be hit. Now, it doesn't have a railway through it. The railway is down to the south. You can see this railway. It's a straight line there. That comes to the south of Chaplynka. But as far as I understand, that just goes up, as I said before, to Kherson, and that railway doesn't join with the other railways around. So actually, it's going to be more about hitting the roads than the railways in this case, and taking out. When you're going to hit roads, you're really going to want to take bridges out. So I don't know what the bridges are along there, if there are any, but that's what you want to take out, because you can fix roads, or you put a hole in a road, you just drive around the side of it, depending on where it is. But if you take out a bridge, it's far more far greater ramifications to that. So anyway, what they're saying now is that hitting Chonhar means that there's an awful lot of places around here that are going to be really ripe for the picking, particularly that route through Armyansk to Chaplynka and onwards. So we shall see. I'd expect to see those kind of hits over the next few days. And that's probably quite enough of me banging on about things. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I really appreciate all of your support. I can't thank you enough. Toodle pips, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.